Good evening, everyone. Доброго вечора всім. Thank you for joining us today. I am Halina Gus, Behavioral Support Lead at Ivan Franko Home. It's my great pleasure to welcome you on behalf of Ivan Franko Home. Our webinar is expected to run for an hour this evening, including a question and answer session. You are welcome to send your question in at any time by using the chat box at the bottom of your screen. This webinar will be recorded and made available to you on our website. Today's discussion is about Alzheimer's and dementia and their impact on residents' communication. Understanding behaviors and communication is particularly important to us to explore with the aging population of our residents. Stay tuned to learn about the responsive behaviors and effective communication strategies for supporting loved ones with Alzheimer dementia and other dementias. It's my pleasure to welcome our guest speaker this evening, Courtney Edmond. She's a registered social worker, BSO caregiver specialist lead, long-term care lead at Alzheimer's Society of Toronto. Courtney's experience and expertise includes supporting caregivers through navigation of the healthcare system and their loved ones' transition and journey within the long-term care. Courtney, we are so pleased to have you this evening. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm just going to share my screen so we can get started now. Okay, so our presentation today will be on understanding behaviors and communication strategies. But to start off our presentation today, I just wanted to ask, and you can write a response just in the chat, what your relationship to the person you are caring for who is living with Alzheimer's disease or another form of dementia is. So whether you're a spouse, a child, a friend, a professional, a healthcare staff, other, if you could just write a brief response in the chat just so I get a sense of who is attending our presentation today. Okay, I'll give it just another moment or so. Okay, we'll move on. So I did just want to say a big thank you to everyone participating in today's webinar. So there will be opportunities to use the chat box throughout for some engagement during the presentation, but there will also be time allotted for some question and answers at the end. So please use that feature because we will be answering some questions at the end of the presentation. In terms of our agenda for today's presentation, we will start with an overview of dementia and look at the ways that dementia changes the brain and its ability to function. Then we will look at how these changes impact one's ability to communicate and then explore some tips, strategies.
I'm so sorry. It seems like our chat is disabled. I just got one answer.
Yeah, no problem then. Feel free then, I guess. There won't be too many polls during the presentation where we do ask for feedback. But feel free to write in the chat then what your relationship is to the person you're caring for. For some of the polls, we'll try to utilize that feature instead. But moving back to what we will be discussing today, we will be looking at how these changes impact one's ability to communicate, and then we will be exploring some strategies and tips for improving our communication. Before we do get started today, though, I did want to take a moment just to acknowledge how challenging caring and supporting someone with dementia can be. So whether you are a friend, a family member, a former caregiver, or professional, we all experience moments where we can feel very disconnected, especially when we feel we are losing our ability to connect and communicate with the person. These moments of disconnect can result in feeling scared, sad, helpless, confused, and angry. but we want you to know that you are not alone in the difficulties you encounter and the emotions you feel. More importantly, I hope this webinar is helpful in equipping you with some new tools, education, and skills that you enable you to better connect with the person you are caring for who is living with dementia. Okay, just another quick poll, and again, as the chat is not working, if you feel comfortable, you're welcome to share in the Q&A section what the person you are caring for, what type of dementia they are living with, whether that be Alzheimer's disease, vascular dementia, Lewy body dementia, frontal temporal lobe dementia, another type of dementia, mixed dementia, or you're not sure what type.
Courtney, actually, I'm sorry to bother you. I have received few answers. So we have a mother and child, we have granddaughter, and we have, okay.
Oh yes, I see some responses now, and I see someone said that their mother is living with vascular dementia. Someone also shared that they're not sure what type. Just give it another couple of seconds. Someone, their mother is living with early onset dementia. Perfect. Well, it sounds like there are quite a wide variety of different folks caring for someone with a different form of dementia or cognitive impairment on our webinar today. So I'm certainly going to talk about the common types a little bit more and what areas of the brain are impacted and how that impacts things like communication and behavior. Okay. So what is dementia? So a lot of people think that dementia is a specific disease, but it's actually not. So dementia is an umbrella term which we use to describe a set of symptoms that include things like loss of memory, understanding, judgment, and a decline of our cognitive thinking abilities. It can also impact our language and behaviors. So to give you an analogy, say you're not feeling well and go see the doctor. The doctor might ask you, what are your symptoms? You might tell the doctor that you have a runny nose, a cough, you're sneezing, just overall not feeling well. So these are your symptoms, but what is the cause behind these symptoms? It may be that you have a flu, a cold, or even allergies. So similarly with dementia, dementia can be caused by many different things. One potential cause is Alzheimer's disease, but it's certainly not the only reason why a person may experience these symptoms. Dementia is caused by irreversible disorders affecting the brain. However, there are some conditions that produce symptoms that are similar to dementia, but unlike dementia, can actually be treated. So these are just some examples of treatable conditions that can produce similar symptoms to dementia. So there's delirium, which is characterized by a sudden onset of confusion and sometimes caused by an infection. There's depression, there's alcohol use disorder, which could contribute to the cause of Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome, which used to be called alcohol-related dementia. This is a potentially reversible neurodegenerative disorder that develops as a result of severe lack of thiamine in the body. People who have dependence on alcohol are most likely to have a thiamine deficiency, since alcohol can interfere with the body's ability to absorb essential vitamins. Most symptoms of Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome are reversible if treated promptly. Improvements in memory function are often slow and may not be completely restored. Other conditions that can produce similar symptoms are things like sleep disorder, malnutrition, drug interaction, or severe medication side effect. Often these conditions are reversible when the underlying cause of the symptoms is treated. When we talk about dementia, we are referring to irreversible brain disorders such as Alzheimer's disease and others. And we're going to go into some of these now on our next slide. So here we have the umbrella, which illustrates how dementia is an umbrella term that is used to describe a set of symptoms, as well as some of the most common causes of dementia. So we have Alzheimer's disease, frontal temporal dementia, Lewy body dementia, vascular dementia, and Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. However, it should be noted that this is not an exhaustive list, as there are over 80 types of dementia. So we're going to briefly examine the most prominent characteristics of each of these irreversible causes, starting with Alzheimer's disease. So with Alzheimer's disease, what's initially most characteristic is memory loss and forgetfulness, as well as changes in mood and behavior. With frontal temporal dementia, the onset usually occurs at a younger age, usually 50s and 60s, and language difficulties are often a presenting symptom, as well as personality and behavioral changes. With Lewy body dementia, we often see Parkinson-like symptoms such as muscle rigidity, tremors, and difficulties with movement, as well as vivid hallucinations. With vascular dementia, it's the result of one or more strokes, and its progression is step-like. For instance, should someone have a stroke or a series of mini strokes, we may see a sudden decline in their cognitive and physical functioning, but then it will remain sort of even keel until another stroke occurs, at which time we may see another sudden decline in the person's mental and physical functioning. Lastly, with Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, it's a very rare disease that's caused by infectious prions, and one variant of this disease is mad cow disease. The symptoms of this are very similar to Alzheimer's disease. However, its progression is much more rapid, with most people passing away within 2 years of diagnosis. It is important to note that while changes in one's ability to communicate is universal amongst dementia, the ways in which these changes present may differ depending on the type of dementia. For example, decline in oral and written communication is often one of the first symptoms of frontal temporal dementia, whereas with Alzheimer's disease, having difficulty placing a name to a face may occur later in the progression. More often than not, language skills will vary on a daily basis, which is why it is so important to make the best of the good days and learn how to respond to the bad days. So there are 3 defining characteristics of Alzheimer's disease. First is that it is progressive, in that the amount of damage done by the disease increases over time. The second is that it is degenerative, in that the nerve cells in the brain degenerate or break down over time. Now, as we grow older, it is normal for there to be degeneration. However, there's also regeneration in the nerve cells. This is a part of healthy aging, but for those diagnosed with dementia, there is no cell regeneration, which is why dementia is not part of normal aging. The third characteristic is the fact that Alzheimer's disease is irreversible, meaning that at this point in time, the damage caused by the disease cannot be repaired. Currently, there are medications and treatments that can help slow the progression of the disease and manage some of the symptoms of dementia. However, there is no medication to actually reverse the damage done to the brain. So next, we are just looking at how dementia impacts the brain functions. And while we won't be going too depth into the role of each lobe, it is important to appreciate that different parts of the brain play an intricate role in executing different functions and abilities. Moreover, the parts of the brain work together to execute a multitude of tasks that we can sometimes take for granted. For example, talking, listening, feeling, physically moving, perceiving, interacting, and engaging with the world around us. So when there is damage done to any part of the brain, the corresponding function will be affected. For example, the frontal lobe is responsible for our expressive language and word association. So when this part of the brain is impacted by dementia, the person will experience severe challenges that will be reflected in their ability to communicate. Or when damage is done to the temporal lobe, which is responsible for our verbal and visual memory, this too will impact one's communication. For example, abstract language may become more difficult to process and understand. For instance, a comment such as "hit the road, Jack," or wishing someone well by saying "break a leg" may not register as well as it used to and just cause the person confusion. Therefore, we need to be more specific with our instructions and more concrete in our descriptions. We can't see the changes that are taking place in the brain. If someone breaks their leg, we can see those changes have taken place. However, in dementia, we can't see those changes even though there are physical changes taking place that have an impact on a person with dementia's functioning, which impact language and communication. So a little bit more about communication in the brain. And again, as outlined in this slide, the brain is responsible for every aspect of our being able to communicate. For instance, expressing ourselves, our likes and dislikes, as well as our needs, wants, desires, whether it be through oral or written language. The brain is responsible for this. How we make sense of what others are saying to us, recognizing the meaning of their words, and appreciating their message. For example, a person living with dementia may have difficulty appreciating a statement such as, "It's minus 10 degrees outside, make sure you dress appropriately." So this may be difficult for the person to act upon. If the person is no longer capable of understanding the meaning of minus 10 degrees or dress appropriately. The brain is also responsible for maintaining the various languages we have learned throughout our life, as well as recalling and following the social customs or norms in terms of communication. It's important to note that these norms can differ depending on one's culture. Customs may become a bit jumbled and confusing for a person with dementia. Lastly, it's important to emphasize that the brain is responsible for all muscle movement, which includes moving the muscles required for speech and writing. So this too will be impacted as a result of the damage done to the brain. The brain also helps us interpret body language and facial expression. A person with dementia may be more in tune with body language, so we need to keep that in mind as we interact with someone who is living with dementia. When we look at this next slide, we see how a person's ability to communicate is affected. For example, when someone has dementia, it is normal for them to have difficulty understanding what others are saying to them, as well as interpreting the meaning of the person's message. For example, I remember a story of a wife who was sick with the flu and her husband who was caring for her had dementia. While she was ill, she would ask him to go to the kitchen to prepare a bowl of soup, and he would be off for a few minutes, but when he returned would be empty-handed. After a few too many failed attempts, she became a bit frustrated and went down to the kitchen and found him looking throughout all the cabinets. Whether he wasn't able to recognize what it was, or recall what she needed, or comprehend what was being asked of him, regardless, the change in his being able to understand what she communicated resulted in him being unable to respond and act accordingly. Repetition of words or phrases, as well as forgetting conversations, can be a huge source of stress and frustration for the caregiver, but it's important to recognize that the brain is not letting the person keep that information for long, which is why it's being repeated and recycled. If someone is repeating, it might for them feel like the first time they are asking this. We may also see a decline in one's awareness of how to respond in social situations. For instance, there may be a decline in their emotional awareness, and the person, for example, may laugh at a funeral or attend a birthday party and not wish the person a happy birthday. It's not because the person is trying to be rude or insulting. It is just a reflection of the changes in the brain. It is also common for the person to revert back to speaking their mother tongue. For instance, people who are bilingual, the language that was learned later in life will be the first to go. So for a bilingual Canadian who learned English later on, they may lose their ability to speak English and revert back to their first language. One final note, it's important to remember that communication abilities really vary from person to person depending on the type of dementia and the stage of progression of the disease. It's important to keep these things in mind and know that they do vary day to day. Strategies that work one day may not work the next. So we recognize that there are many challenges in regards to dementia and communication, but we really want to emphasize the importance of communication. As we all share the basic need to communicate and feel connected with other people, communicating our needs, wants, and emotions is critical for preserving both our quality of life and identity. Communication is also a vessel for connecting with others and building relationships, which in turn allows us the opportunity to feel engaged, heard, and understood. Therefore, any changes in one's ability to communicate can severely impact any or all of these areas. So next, let's look at ways to maximize our ability to communicate and connect with people who have dementia. So here listed are just 5 core requirements for effective communication. So one is belief that every person, regardless of their dementia or disease, maintains a core of self that can be reached. In other words, don't lose sight of the person. Dementia can be overshadowing at times, but we must do our best to see past the disease and focus on the person and their remaining strengths. 2 is creativity and flexibility in expressing both your feelings and your message. You may try alternative forms of communication such as music, touch, for example, a hand massage, the use of images and looking through photos and reminiscing. 3, is understanding, so learning about the effect of the disease on communication, which is why your participation in education in this webinar is so important. For being patient, so to slow down, listen, watch, wait for a response, repeat a phrase. This can be difficult, but patience is key, and to give the person living with dementia a bit of extra time to understand and formulate a response. 5, being evaluation, so what is working and why. Keeping a journal can be a great outlet. Not only is it therapeutic and a great way to express your own emotions, but it can also help to document what worked, what was helpful. We are all human, and sometimes we might say the wrong thing or things don't go the way we thought. So it's important to take a step back and see what went wrong, what we can do differently, or what went well and why. So for this next poll, and please use the Q&A section as well, I just want you to share one communication strategy that you find works for you in your caregiving role. Just give it a couple seconds or so. Repetition. Patience. Touch, music. Picking a topic of interest to discuss. Dealing with one thing at a time. Yes, the chat is now open, so please feel free to use that now for any poll questions or any questions I do ask for the presentation. The Q&A section can be used for questions you may have at the end. Okay. Someone also said dealing with one thing at a time. Okay, those were all very great strategies and techniques that you have been utilizing. We're just going to talk about some general communication tips now. In regards to number 1, so limiting distractions and setting the stage. So ensuring that the room is well lit, there's not a lot of noise. More intimate interactions are preferable, one-on-one, for example. Thinking of what time of day works best in terms of things like a visit or booking an appointment. So if the person is most alert in the morning, you might want to try and schedule a appointment or a visit for that time of day, or if they're more themselves in the afternoon, thinking of that time as well. It's important to also get the person's attention. So to call them by their name, approach them gently from the front, introduce yourself if necessary. To make eye contact, so maybe kneel so that you are on their level and better able to make eye contact with them. To avoid hovering over the person, you want to connect with them so that you are speaking as equals. This helps them feel like they're a little more in control. Thinking about your body language is also important. It's important to also speak slowly and clearly, ensure you are enunciating your words. Give more time to allow the words to register with the person. More time to formulate a response and say a response out loud. Give one message at a time. So instead of grab your jacket, mitts, and scarf and let's go for a walk, break it down. So you could say, would you like to go for a walk? Yes. Let's get your jacket. Put on your jacket. Let's get your mitts. Put on your mitts. It's important to also pay attention to see how the person is responding to your words. Are they taking in the information? What is their mood like? Can you see in their body language? Are they clenching their fists? Can you see they are getting frustrated? What's their affect like? It's important to also repeat information. Perhaps if there's a steep step, you may want to say, please step slowly, mom, and repeat slowly. Emphasize the word that matters most. Show and talk. So for instance, would you care for a glass of water, and show them the glass of water? Or asking them if they need to use the washroom, point to the washroom sign with the male or female figurine. Take your time. Patience is key. It's okay to recognize when you don't have it. We all have stressful days and times where we aren't able to give as much as ourselves as we expect, and that's okay. Even if you need to step away for a few minutes just to take some breaths for yourself, as again, patience can be a challenge. It's okay to take a step back and take a few minutes to collect yourself if needed. Okay, and now we're just going to go into some more general communication tips. So first being to limit open-ended questions. So try to create questions so that the person is able to answer yes or no, or maybe. For example, would you like to wear the blue sweater? Or limit options such as, would you like a turkey or a ham sandwich? Giving them an option to choose, but open-ended questions may be overwhelming. Can be easier to answer a closed-ended question where they can choose between two options. Limit use of negatives. They can be confusing and not as well received for persons with dementia. So instead of saying no, don't sit in that chair, say, I saved a chair for you over by me, we can sit together. This reframes it in a more positive light. Do not quiz. So remember that the person's ability to make sense of things, their ability to use logic, is all being impacted by the disease. So we need to do our best to avoid quizzing them. Also, it often results in their feeling stressed, embarrassed, and overwhelmed, all of which we want to avoid. For example, do you remember who I am, what you had for breakfast today? We do it with the best of intentions, but this may make the person who is living with dementia feel like they are being put in the hot seat, which can result in them feeling embarrassed or overwhelmed. Use familiar words. So for example, I wouldn't ask someone with dementia if they wanted to take a selfie. Rather, I would ask them if we could take a photograph together. Avoid arguing or reasoning, and this is something that I did see in the chat or Q&A when I was browsing through. Again, the person's ability to reason is being impaired by the disease, so it's really not fair to engage in arguing for both the person with the disease as well as ourselves, as it can be very draining. If we get into trying to argue or reason, what we tried to promote is to connect and not correct or don't correct. So connect on an emotional level rather than correcting what they're saying. So for example, you know, the person's mother has passed away. Try it. Sounds like you really miss your mom. She sounds like a great lady. Can you tell me a little bit more about her? Don't take it personally. So this is, of course, much easier said than done. However, it is so important to remember the changes that we are seeing are a result of dementia and not a reflection of a relationship with that person. This might be when you take a step back and make sure your verbal and nonverbal message are the same. We want to be as consistent and as clear as possible. For instance, if I say to my mom, well, this has been a lovely visit. I love you so much. You are such a great mother, and I can't wait to see you next time, with a very sarcastic tone. It will likely be confusing for her to understand, and she won't know what I mean or pick up on intuition. So if you're having trouble understanding, it's important to listen actively and carefully to what the person is trying to say and ask yourself, are you in a position to really listen? So is your cell phone going off? Are you easily distracted right now? It's important to be present. To pick out words that make sense. Repeat it to the person and see whether there is a response or a connection. May not be immediate, but we sometimes have to play detective to try and figure out what they are trying to get across. So I remember a story of a son who said his mother would go to the kitchen and say, ooh, and it took him some time, but he eventually discovered that was her way of asking for an orange. Respond to the emotional tone, mirroring body language. There's another story of a father and a son. The father was always animated and an animated storyteller, and he would be very excited about the things he was talking about. As things went on and things progressed, the father had more difficulty putting stories together. The son learned to mirror his body language. Sad story would be sad facial expression. Happy story would respond with laughter, smile, excitement. This allowed them to have a connection, even if he couldn't follow exactly. It's important to try to stay calm and patient. Again, know your limits. Know that you have every right to have limits, and know when you need to take time for yourself and a step back. It's important to recognize your signs of stress, and it's important for us to do our best to manage our stress so that we don't let it seep into our relationship or care for the person with dementia. some more notes. So it's important to be sure to allow enough response time. Try to avoid cutting the person off. We want to allow them the opportunity to contribute what they can and empower their remaining strengths. Try demonstrating visually what you are saying. Again, making our verbal and visual messages clear and consistent. Think about the complexity of what you are saying. Ask yourself, is there any way we can break this down into simpler steps? For example, would you like to bake a cake? Let's go get the sugar. Let's go get the flour. Break it down into simpler steps. So this is just a quote to remember. The most important thing in communication is hearing what isn't said. So there is so much more to communication than just words. The tone of our voice, body language, facial expressions, mood, and affect. And again, there are losses that come with dementia. There's no denying that, but still we need to do our best to be diligent and not being so overwhelmed by those losses. That what we lose sight of the person, that we don't lose sight of the person. And lastly, people with dementia, just like all of us, will have good and bad days. So as I shared before, we want to do our best to make the most of the good days and ensure we are receiving good support for ourselves on those tough days. Okay, now we're going to get into talking about behavior now. Okay, so here we can see there are two definitions of behavior from Oxford Dictionary. The first being that the way in which a person acts in response to a particular situation or stimulus, and the way in which one acts or conducts oneself, especially towards others. So there are many definitions for behavior. You can see that in the first definition, it highlights that our behavior is a response to a particular situation or stimulus. These could be internal or external stimulus. So this tells us that all behavior has meaning. There is a reason for human behavior. It may be internal or external stimulus that is causing someone to behave the way they do. Just in the chat box, another question for you all. I'm just going to read the following factors, and I want you to share how these would impact your behavior. So when you have a cold, when you had a bad night's sleep, when you had an argument the morning before work, are in pain, have a headache, or hungry, how would these make you feel? Grouchy, frustrated, irritable, dismissive, agitated, okay, and the second, overwhelmed. The second question I'm going to ask is, do these things change your behavior? So do these things change your typical behavior? How would they change your behavior? Be sluggish, agitated, okay. Tired and burnt out, indifferent, irritable towards others, be more aggressive, feel more discouraged. Yeah, absolutely. These are all things that would likely come as a result of feeling this way. You might also be more quiet, not want to talk to people, miserable. Okay, so as we talked about early in our presentation, there are many changes to one's brain that occur when someone has dementia, and this may affect their ability to communicate, may also lead to confusion and frustration, and can lead to changes in the person's behavior. So again, behaviors are a form of communication. The person is trying to tell us something. A person with dementia may behave a certain way to express themselves, to give information to those around them. Okay, so here are some behaviors that we typically see and hear about when interacting with a person living with dementia. Do any of these resonate with any of you? Are there any additional behaviors? So feel free to share in the chat if any of these resonate with you, if you have ever noticed any of these in your loved one, if there are any that aren't mentioned on this list. Yep, so someone said repeating behaviors, spitting. Let's give it another couple seconds, telling caregivers to hurry. Loss of basic social skills. Repetitive questions, actions, collecting items. Thinking everyone is stolen from them. Yeah, so there's definitely quite a lot of ones folks are sharing that they have experienced, but also ones folks have mentioned that aren't on this list as well. So essentially, with that being said, it's important to emphasize that every person with dementia will be different. These behaviors will not be present in everyone, and some people may not experience any of these behaviors. It is not only negative behavior that we will notice, there will also be many positive moments and wonderful experiences as well. The reason these behaviors are highlighted is because they are often the commonly identified behaviors that can be challenging for care partners. The purpose of this slide is to guide us in understanding what are some common behaviors that one may see when caring for someone with dementia. It's also to give people some context to understand that these behaviors might be expected when someone has dementia. And it allows us to understand that you are not alone in the process, because these are very common things that many care partners do have to manage and experience when caring for their loved one. Okay, so I want you all just to take a look at this photo, and if you can just share in this chat what this photo means to you, or what does it make you think of? Okay, I'll give it a couple seconds. Unexpressed wants, needs, or desires. Someone said that it means there's a lot we can't observe directly. The person is still there, but only the top layer is getting through. Still waters run deep, and there's a lot more below the surface that one is aware of. Yeah, so these are all great answers. Essentially, we need to look deep to find out information about the person beyond what we see on the surface. We can see the behavioral changes that a person living with dementia might display, but it is our job as care partners to determine what might be triggering or causing these behaviors. What is below the surface? What is not visible? What is the person trying to tell me? We'll be referring to this a little bit more in the next couple of slides. But we're essentially just going to discuss how we can shift our focus from thinking about the behavior. This is something that can be very challenging for us, to shift our focus to understanding what the person is responding to. Okay, so now that we are thinking about behaviors as a form of communication or a way of expressing an unmet need, how can we figure out what the unmet need might be? So we do use this acronym to help us understand what the meaning is behind the behavior. As I shared before, it is important to remember that every person is different. There will be a different reason for behavior from each individual person. So first, we're going to talk about the P. So thinking about the person is very important. There are many aspects to the person that are important to consider. So when it comes to the physical, it's important to ask yourself, is the person in pain? Are they comfortable? Could there be any underlying medical conditions that are leading to changes in their behavior? With emotional, ask yourself, what are emotional factors? What emotional factors are contributing to this person's behavior? Are they fearful? Are there signs of depression? When it comes to past life and history, just asking yourself, what is this person's morals, values, dislikes, likes? What did they do for work? What was their social life like? What is their past routines? With The E, so the environment is surrounding the person. The environment surrounding the person often can impact the individual's behavior. So it's important to consider things like physical space. So is it a familiar space? What is the noise level? Are there cues available in the environment? For example, can the person find the sign to the washroom? In terms of lighting, is there dark shadows or very bright lights? Is it an overstimulating environment? Is it understimulating? In regards to the social space, how are they interacting with those around them? Are they seeing people often? With the T, so thinking about the task and how the task is presented is very important. So it's important to remember that as dementia progresses, the person may experience changes to their ability to perform tasks. What was once something that was a simple task for them may be now more difficult, as well as tasks that the person previously did not enjoy can become more enjoyable for the person. So this type of thing can change for them as well. It's important to meet the person where they are at in their journey and think about the task. So how is the task laid out? What part of the task can the person still do? What do they need support around? It's important for us to focus on the individual strengths, on what they can still do, and try not to focus on the losses or things they can no longer do. And lastly, A for approach. So often we as care partners do not consider our approach and how this may be contributing to some of the behaviors we are noticing in the person. It's important to take time for personal self-reflection. So think about our body language, what I'm saying with my body, our communication. So using some of the tips I've provided throughout this presentation. In terms of speed, am I rushing the person? Am I getting frustrated? As we all know, providing care can be very stressful, and it is a journey that may require help. It's important to know that you're not alone. So just going back to the iceberg picture and the list of challenging behaviors that we discussed. Just a very, very quick question. So if how would you feel or behave if I shut the doors, threw away the key, and told you that you were now stuck in this room overnight with no access to cell service? Scared, isolated, frustrated, anxious. Some of these might look quite similar to some of the common behaviors we went over when it comes to things like wandering. You might be trying to wander and get out of the space. You might be very paranoid. Many of these behaviors might look common, similar to ones that we see in our loved ones. So ultimately, as we've noticed in our presentation, behavior is responsive. So we are responding to an unmet need. This allows us to understand that the person is not doing it on purpose. It is a response to something. This also shifts our focus from thinking about the behavior as challenging into framing it as a response to an unmet need. We first need to determine the unmet need in order to do this. This will then allow us to determine a strategy to help support this behavior moving forward. It's important to also think about behavior as a form of communication and thinking about what the person is trying to tell you or what they're trying to express. Okay, so before I do just close off, I did just want to ask if anyone can share one piece of information from this workshop that they found will be helpful in their caregiving role moving forward. If there's anything that stood out to you or anything that you maybe hadn't thought of before and maybe will take from this presentation and do differently in your interactions with your loved one. So be patient, keep it simple, of course. Being more patient, suggested communication approaches, to not quiz them. Absolutely. Wording to use when asking questions, absolutely. Okay, I'm just going to move into the last couple slides very quickly so we have enough time for Q&A. But I just wanted to quickly share our programs and services that we do have available at the Alzheimer Society of Toronto. So we are available to help anyone who is facing the challenges of dementia. So we have our First Link service. We're here to help you by giving information you need to learn more about dementia, caregiving, and coping strategies. We provide support by telephone, virtually, in person, or through a support group. We also have a wide range of educational sessions like this one on a variety of different topics to meet your needs. And we also connect you to services in your community that can give you additional help and support. These are just some of our upcoming webinars that are occurring within the next week. We do have a webinar on our platform called Also Educate on loss and grief for care partners coming up. We do also have Understanding Behaviors and Supportive Communication, which is the presentation that you all participated in today. But if you did want to view it again, you can do so through our platform. And we do also have an overview of dementia being offered on February 1st. Okay, and if you would like to connect, this is my contact information, so feel free to reach out at any time. If you did want to explore more of our offered webinars, you can do so at alzeducate.ca. And if you did want to connect to your local Alzheimer's Society, or if Toronto would be the region for your society, you can do so by going to alzheimer.ca. Okay, I'm just going to stop sharing my screen now. Okay, I think we're good to move into the next section.
Courtney, thank you for sharing your presentation with us. This is with some valuable information which our community will greatly benefit from learning. So now, as you said, we will begin the Q&A portion of our webinar. Thank you. Actually, I see already a few questions that was put in the chat box before. Is it common for a person with dementia to have some sense of their limitation and show anger over this? If so, how should a caregiver respond?
Yeah, so it is common. Many folks are aware of the changes and limitations they are experiencing with the progression of their dementia. This is often why some of those behaviors that we mentioned during the presentation do occur. I would say it really does depend on their reaction or behavior they might be exhibiting, and in terms of how you might respond, it can be subjective. But certainly all of the strategies that we discussed today in terms of being patient, breaking things down, being aware of things like tone, body language, introducing yourself, those are all very important things to consider when you are interacting with your loved one. But I would say it is really subjective to the situation in terms of how to respond. But if you are maybe looking for specific advice on your situation, you can certainly always reach out to us at the Alzheimer's Society of Toronto. We do have social work support. We also have my support, where we could discuss it further, and specific tips and strategies could be provided.
Thank you, Courtney. So actually, one of our attendees is asking, how does one find a support group for a caregiver to a person with dementia? If you could, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a wide variety of support groups available through the Alzheimer's Society of Toronto. We have ones that are specific to dementia diagnosis, and we have ones that are also specific to the relationship to the person you were caring for. So we do have one for adult children. We have one for spouses. So we are quite broad in the types of groups we offer. We do run groups, some in person at our main office at Yonge and Eglinton, but we also do have a hub in Scarborough as well that we run some support groups, and we do have satellite locations, one being Providence. But in terms of finding these, we have an event calendar that I can send to the team at Ivan Franco to share with you if you are interested in signing up. Something we will also be starting in the spring that I'll share more information with the team then is a long-term care specific support group. So I will be offering a virtual support group for people who do have a loved one in long-term care. So I'll definitely share more information with them that can be shared with all of you.
Thank you, Courtney, for your answer. We have another question. What factors can trigger challenging behaviors in residents with dementia?
Yeah, so definitely quite a number of things that were mentioned in the presentation. So environment can be a factor. Just being aware too of their past life history. Sometimes things like where they grew up or life events they experienced can certainly have a factor in how they might respond to something or react. So that there are many different things that can be a trigger. I would say environment can be a significant one, but something that we look at is something called the pieces approach. So we look at different factors like the person's physical health. So are they in any pain? Pain can be a big cause but behind behaviors as well, because they aren't able to express that need as their dementia progresses. There's many different things that can contribute. These are just some of them. But I would be happy to share a little bit more information on some of that as well that can be sent out and shared.
Thank you, Courtney, for your answer. So we have another question. How is that people who have had a healthy lifestyle, those who had very important intellectual demanding jobs, Margaret teacher comes to mind, get Alzheimer's, dementia?
Yeah, so unfortunately, dementia doesn't discriminate. It can be attributed to a number of different causes. A lot of research is still being done to determine that. Sometimes it can be hereditary or genetic. Sometimes environment can be a factor as well. Sometimes, as we went over in the presentation, it could be the result of the experience of another medical condition like a stroke. So there are unfortunately a number of different factors. There are ways to try and be preventative as possible. I can definitely send some of that information out as well to be shared with you, but there isn't an exact cause for everyone. The disease unfortunately doesn't discriminate. Could be a number of different factors.
Thank you, Courtney, for your Okay, another question we have, how can we distinguish between behavior that occurs due to physical cause, such as an infection, or possibly due to other causes? Thank you.
Yeah. So I would say at least within a long-term care home setting, the BSO lead typically will do some work to observe the behavior and try to work with the team to determine the cause. If they do suspect it might be due to an infection, urinary tract infection being a quite common cause for something like delirium, they would do their due diligence and run the necessary tests and screening to determine that. They would also use different screening tools within the long-term care setting to determine things like frequency of behavior, potential triggers. They would likely have contact with yourselves as caregivers to learn a little bit more about the individual as well. But I would say in terms of how to distinguish between a physical cause or a potential other cause, they would likely do a lot of different medical screening and tests to try and determine that. But I think, at least from my experience in long-term care, when they do think there is potential UTI or other infection causing the behavior, they do try to screen for that right away.
Thank you, Courtney, for that. Another attendee is asking, why do residents with dementia, Alzheimer's, exhibit wandering or want to leave a familiar environment? Thank you.
Yeah. So that can that one, again, there's many different factors that might play into it. Could be, for instance, because short-term memory is what's most impacted, sometimes it can just be losing the familiarity of their current space. Maybe they've lived in a home for a decade, but they remember themselves living in their previous home that they lived in for 30 years. So it could be due to factors like memory loss. Again, it could have to just do with things related to their past life history. There's many different causes behind wandering and exit-seeking behavior. It is very subjective to the person. Again, depending on what's determined, if you do some observations and some screening and testing to determine and rule out cause. Sometimes it is the result of an infection like a UTI. Sometimes that's behavior that does occur, but every behavior, it could be a variety of different causes, whether it is something like pain relating back to the physical, or whether it's something to do with a trigger or past life history as well.
Thank you, Courtney. There is another question from attendee. How can caregivers maintain their own well-being while managing difficult situations with loved ones suffering with dementia, Alzheimer's disease?
Yeah. So it can be definitely very, very difficult to manage and to separate from your role as a caregiver. But I would say that's when self-care can be very helpful. And I know self-care is sometimes easier said than done, but that's when attending a support group through us or connecting with us for a one-to-one counseling session can be very helpful, just to help work through and come up with strategies for yourself to make sure that you are taking that time for yourself and setting those boundaries and taking a step back when needed.
Thank you, Courtney, for that. So the last question we have, I see, when someone goes off on a tangent, example, talks about people who no one knows, should just let them talk or change the subject or give them gentle feedback?
Yeah, so there are different approaches you can take. One we do talk about a lot at the Alzheimer's Society is the 4 Rs, and redirection is one of them. So changing the subject, or changing the subject to a topic or person or thing that typically puts them in a good mood or they like to talk about, can be a helpful strategy. You could also just meet them where they're at. That's that connect, don't correct approach I talked about. So depending on your own comfort with the approach, you can meet them where they're at and engage in conversation about the person, or you could use a strategy like redirection. If you're unsure where abouts to go or how to end the tangent, or maybe the tangent is causing you some stress and emotion as well, and maybe you're needing to take a step back and a step away just for some patience, that's when you can reapproach the situation. So if you're visiting at the long-term care home, that can be when you say, I have to go to the washroom, I'll be right back, or I have to get something for my car, I'll be right back. If you're on the phone, so-and-so just called, I will call you back, or this just arrived for me, I have to go grab it, I'll call you back. Usually returning and reapproaching the situation, that can oftentimes things can change, and you can reapproach the situation. And usually the tangent in those scenarios, it's stopped. So that's a strategy to try out as well. But I do have resources on that approach that I can also send for them to share with you too.
Thank you so much, Courtney, for your input. It seems like it's 8 o'clock, so we have to wrap up our session. So I extend my sincere appreciation to all of the attendees and participants, and special thanks to Courtney for sharing valuable insights on dementia. So wishing you all a wonderful evening, and we look forward to reconnecting with you on our next session. I just would like to let you know, as usual, after the webinar, we will be sending a survey for your feedback. Thank you so much. Good night.